Welcome back to Keep Heading East. I'm Murray from the YC Cookery School. If you're joining us again, then welcome back. And if you're joining this series for the first time, you've joined us in Israel. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at Israeli cuisine, its roots, and why it's become so popular in Western countries. If you're new, you can check out the main introduction to this series by clicking the on-screen link and follow the link in the description to our free PDF cookbook with all the dishes that we'll be cooking in this series. Or if you prefer a printed version, then there's one there as well. Now, the state of Israel is located on the southeastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea and the northern shores of the Red Sea. It has land borders with Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan to the east, the Palestine territories of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to the east and the west respectively, and Egypt to the southwest. Now, while Israel's government is based in Jerusalem, its economic, technological and gastronomical centre is Tel Aviv. Israel's culinary traditions comprise of food and cooking methods that span around 3,000 years and have influences from Asia, Africa and Europe. Now, the religious and ethnic influences have resulted in Israeli cuisine being quite the culinary melting pot. Recognized as the state of Israel since just after the Second World War, the new state faced huge military and economic challenges in its early years. And through until 1958, it was a time of food rationing and austerity. Now, during this decade, over 1 million Jewish immigrants, mainly from Arab countries, but also from European Holocaust survivors, descended on the new state, bringing with them all of their own geographical influences. And they all arrived at a time when only sort of basic food items were available, and ethnic dishes had to be modified sort of slightly to suit the ingredients available. Things like turkey as a substitute for veal schnitzel, kibbeh made from frozen fish instead of ground meat. These adaptations and many, many more remain as sort of the legacy of that time. So Israel doesn't really have a universally recognized national dish. In previous years, it was probably considered to be falafel, the deep-fried balls of seasoned ground chickpeas. It was a favourite street food for decades and is still popular as a meze dish or as an addition to a sort of hummus and pita, but less so nowadays. Probably one thing, the Israeli breakfast has always been largely healthy, and by today's standards, some would refer to it as the Jewish state's contribution to global cuisine. Now, back in the early days of the state of Israel, residents from the kibbutz ate their meals in a communal dining hall. It was pretty common for locals to sort of eat a light snack in the morning, work in the fields for several hours, and then return back to the dining hall for a big hearty mid-morning buffet meal, sort of similar to a Western-style brunch. Now, the buffet would have had a huge and really vibrant selection of dairy, fish, vegetable-based dishes, and sort of featured Middle Eastern staples such as Israeli salad, the strained yogurt known as lebna, and tahina and halloumi. There'd be plenty of fresh vegetables and dips like hummus, baba ganoush, which I've included in our cookbook this week. And as common in sort of most of Europe, coffee, tea, juices, fresh fruits, bread and pastries. There would always be eggs available of some description on offer, including the well-known favourite shatsuka, the baked egg and tomato sauce dish brought to Israel by the Tunisian Jews. Now, by the 1950s, Israeli hotels started promoting the Israeli breakfast in the state, similar to the kibbutz meals. But due to the extravagance and the cost of this offering, by sort of 1980, some Israeli hotel owners decided that they'd phase this out, and the full Israeli breakfast was kind of replaced by a more modest continental breakfast instead. However, their efforts weren't very successful, and the tradition of a hearty Israeli breakfast buffet is still really popular today. Now, if you'd like to take a closer look at this Israeli breakfast, then follow on from this episode with a clip from Michel Levit, She's a food and culture enthusiast from Israel, and she's got a nice little clip that sort of describes a few different styles of the Israeli breakfast. Now, Middle Eastern food on the whole has become hugely popular in the West in recent years, as Westerners become more conscious of their diet and the shift towards eating more fresh vegetables, pulses and fish in place of too much meat and heavy dairy products. In many Western countries, what I call the base level of flavour and richness of a dish often comes from its meat content. The flavour is derived from the muscle itself or from ingredients such as pancetta or chorizo. Stocks utilise flavour from the bones and add a great depth of flavour to Western sauces. However, in my opinion, Western vegetarian dishes are often inferior to vegetarian food from the East because they lack that body. Middle Eastern and Asian vegetarian dishes tend to make use of a lot more sort of fresh or raw vegetables where the flavour stays intact, and cooking methods such as grilling over coals that really boost the flavour. And probably the biggest addition is the use of spices. They use lots and lots of spices in the base level of flavour, which is why Eastern dishes are always so visually appealing, fragrant and tasty. Now, one of the biggest Western influences of Middle Eastern cookery in the last 2 decades would have to be Yotam Ottolenghi. Born and raised in Jerusalem, Yotam finished his sort of academic studies in Tel Aviv in 1997. And after a brief stint in Amsterdam, he moved to London and studied French cooking at the Cordon Bleu. In 1999, he took over the role as the head pastry chef at the artisanal pastry shop Baker and Spice. And it was there that he met a Palestine chef called Sami, who grew up in Jerusalem's Old City. So sharing a common language, Hebrew, and a joint sort of uncomprehension of traditional English food, they became quite close friends, and in 2002 founded the delicatessen Ottolenghi. The deli was a huge success, and this style of cooking really captivated the city during the next few years. Ottolenghi style food began cropping up in cafes and gastropubs all over the UK. In 2008, the two of them published their first cookbook, which was simply entitled Ottolenghi, and it sold over 100,000 copies. And since then, there's been 7 more. And his latest book, Simple, is an effort to really simplify some of his cooking for the home cook and to highlight what he considers his 10 most important Middle Eastern ingredients. Now, I've linked to a short clip in the end cards to give you an impression of Yotam and his and these 10 ingredients that he says are the key ingredients to making authentic Middle Eastern food. So that's it for this stop on our Keep Heading East tour of global cuisine. I hope you've enjoyed it. Links are on screen now for the videos I mentioned earlier if you'd like to see a little more from the region. And remember, for our subscribers, there's a fantastic cookbook to accompany this series. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe and grab yourself a free PDF copy of our cookbook, or if you prefer a hard copy, the links are there as well. Thanks for watching. See you soon.